session today.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good news. Thank you, Lucy. Lovely to see you here. Fabulous to see so many friendly faces. As Lucy said, we've got current clients, older clients, clients we've worked with before, and new faces. So it's fabulous to see you all. I'm going to talk to you today about rituals. Lots of people ask us what they are. We have wonderful experience in rituals, and by putting this together, actually, it kind of forced me into looking at the research and being really clear on actually why this is so important to us. And we'll show you the research today, and also a few case studies and examples. As Lucy said, I'd love this to be discursive. Sometimes it's really tough talking at a screen. Always fabulous if you've got any questions, ideas, or things that you've done before to pop those in the chat. That would be fabulous. Okay, let me talk to you about what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to cover how to create engaging rituals in a hybrid world that live out your culture and values and ultimately set your organisation apart. And as we go through, we went through this yesterday. Not everything we cover is hybrid, but most of what we cover can be done in a hybrid world. So if you've got specific hybrid questions, please let us know. And how to then ensure that your workplace culture is reflected in each area of the employee experience. So many of you are from an HR background, so we tried to focus on that employee experience touch point as well, and where you can use rituals within that. I wanted to start with a personal example of a ritual. When we were in lockdown, we were all homeschooling our kids, working and not doing a great deal else. And on a Friday evening, we set up a ritual with our kids where we had a restaurant every Friday. And because we didn't have a lot to do, we would plan for it. We would write menus. We would write up the chalkboard. We would dress up, and then we would take it in turns to cook, serve, etc., etc. And we loved it. And it turned what was sometimes quite a miserable week into something really quite special. And interestingly, I looked at the research when I was planning for this, and it showed that parents who created rituals with their kids in lockdown actually were happier with their parenting. So that makes me sound like a smug parent. I don't mean it like that, but I guess the point is that, you know, rituals can be done anywhere. And in fact, lots of the comments we had on LinkedIn as we were launching this were about personal rituals and things that people did through lockdown, or they do now around their own well-being or around working from home. That is really about creating something that's making you feel better about your day. So what is a ritual? So I won't read you the definition that we've put here, but it is about creating a more meaningful moment from an average starting point. They are normally created with intent and awareness, and they have relevance to either your business strategy or your values, etc., etc. And the bit I loved in here is something that's been imbued with symbolism and meaning. And I guess one example on that would be the hacker. So Marianne did a lot of research for this, and we created a free guide on rituals, and she's going to point some of that out today. And the hacker is on there because, and it's such a fabulous ritual in that it is about storytelling. It's about working through their own culture and their own rituals, and subsequently being able to push that out into sports events, religious events, etc., etc. So it's a really lovely example of a ritual that we see a lot. So keen to know on the chat if any of you do have rituals. I'm going to keep talking. I'm not going to pick out anybody, but anybody who's either had rituals in an organisation they work with now or previously. Marianne, Lucy and I work together in an organisation. I'm going to talk you through some of the rituals from that as we go through. But it's probably one of the places I felt I most belonged. Because some of the rituals were so fabulous that they're still things that we hold on to now. And maybe that's why it's so important to us in the work that we do. So we'd love to hear from you on the chat. So just a bit of the research to kick us off. Michael Norton is doing a lot of work in rituals. His view is that we see in every culture and throughout history that people who perform rituals report feeling better. And a lot of his research was lab driven, where they got people to perform rituals, and then they started to understand the impact that that had on them as a team. Much of the subsequent research, which I'll talk to you about in a moment, has actually been done in a workplace environment. So the research recently is showing that it does increase team bonds and boost performance. And most of us are here ultimately to boost performance. There was an increase in meaningful work and organisational citizenship behaviours, and that all links to the employee behavioural piece. So really connecting into working through how you get people to feel like they belong, that they're a part of a community. And actually, the research showed that there was a 16% increase in how meaningful employees judged their work to be as a result of that. And subsequently, in terms of understanding the psychological piece behind it, there was increased immersion in experiences, greater feelings of control. And in fact, that runs all the way through the research, which can lead to reduced anxiety and increased liking for teammates. So we are very happy to share the research. There's 2 or 3 pieces of research that we come back to all the way through, and Marianne can put that on the chat if anybody's interested. So, excuse me, why do we use these in embedding culture? Many of you have seen the Flint culture change model. Our view is that in order to make a shift in culture, you do need to take a holistic approach. And that starts with the clarity and purpose of people really understanding what we're trying to achieve as an organisation and engaging with it. And then it runs all the way through. And we're going to talk to you about each segment of this and how you can create rituals around it. So I'm not going to read all of these out to you because we're going to come back to them as we go. So obviously the sensible one to start with is symbols, rituals and stories. And this is about some of the kind of unwritten rules of the game. It's about some of the stories people hear, the language people use, and the titles people have, and it's about engaging with people on quite an emotional level. So we're going to talk about rituals all the way through. So I thought I'd focus here on stories. And in fact, I do have clients on the call, so you're going to have to forgive me, but the CEO with a current client I'm working with is a great orator. He's very passionate about what he does. And as we launched their values, we actually got him to tell the story of that organization, and we documented it. And it's gone into all of the playbooks and all of the information about those values. And even as I was interviewing him for that, I became kind of quite emotional about the story around where the organization had come from and how it had got to here. And what we were able to do was to say, values aren't something that are new in this organization, actually. They are something that had been a fundamental part of it all the way through. But in fact, what we've just started to do is articulate it in a clearer way, because we've acquired businesses or new people have joined, and it's helped be really clear on what we're trying to achieve. The beauty of storytelling, and leaders often communicate via facts and figures, and of course there is a real need for that within any organization. But the impact of storytelling is that it connects with people on an emotional level. So it uses a different part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, and it enables us to connect emotionally, to be inspired. And there are kind of 3 things within that neuroscience research. One is that when you connect emotionally, there is a level of tension, and that keeps people wanting more. And certainly in one of the businesses that we worked in, we would have a Friday night ritual, Friday afternoon, where all of us would come together on the top floor. In fact, there's another of our colleagues on the call as well who may well remember this. We would all sit on the top floor, and our CEO would come along and would talk to us about that week. And there would be recognition, there would be, an understanding of what we'd done that week. We would talk about the following week, and it enabled an element of tension. Am I going to get recognized this week? Or, what am I going to hear about this week? It also impacts decision making, and the importance of that is spurring action. So it's about doing something different as a result. And then empathy, and the importance of that is about people caring about the message that you're saying. So this is a slightly more overarching piece, but it's relevant in that, rituals that include storytelling are likely to be more inspiring, more relevant, and more inclusive. I think the other thing to say on that is that, as in the guidance that Marianne put together, we do talk about some rituals around storytelling specifically. And quite often with clients, when we start away days or strategy days, we will start with a chronology of talk about what the organisation has achieved to date. You know, what is the lovely things that we absolutely can't lose in this culture or this strategy. So in terms of rituals, one of the things that we think differentiates Flint is that we added to the academic model ways of working, because when you are trying to shift culture, one of the things that the people who are doing their job every day notice is the ways of working, is what they are doing every day. And actually, we quite often, of course, we start at the top, we start with the leadership team, but we feel really strongly that people anywhere in the organisation can create those behaviours, can impact rituals in what they do every day. So we're going to talk you through some lovely rituals that we've come across, some of which we've done with clients and some of which we've taken from research around impacting the ways of working and bringing people together around that. So I'm actually going to hand over firstly to Marianne, who in the research found this fabulous customer chair example.
Thanks, Alex. So yeah, so this is, you probably hear a lot of people talk about thinking about the customer or putting themselves in the customer's shoes. And this was a really great example that we came across on LinkedIn from Nissan. So what they do is in every meeting room, they have an empty customer chair. And the idea behind this is that whenever they're making any kind of decision or having any kind of discussion, that empty chair reminds them that they must always consider the impact on the customer. What does it mean for the customer? What will they need? And are we considering them in everything that we're doing? So that's a really good visual ritual reminder. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you. And certainly in some of the organisations that we're working with, there is a customer first or customer excellence value. In fact, it regularly comes up in the work we do with clients. So it is something that, you know, can be used in most organisations. A couple of other ones to talk you through. I loved this in the research. This is called Road Trip. So this was an organisation who always had an away day every quarter. It was a sales function. They would come together, talk about sales, talk about the things that got in their way and what they needed to do. And they found that when they then took all those fabulous and innovative ideas from the sales team into the operation, there was a blocker. Operations would say, well, we can't do that because our system doesn't allow it. Or we can't do that because actually the processes from getting that information from the customer to us doesn't work. And the CEO got very frustrated that actually that there was a blocker from all those fabulous ideas. So he changed the away days to a road trip. And every quarter, they would go to a different part of the country and they would have their away days with the operational team and the retail team from that part of the country. So they would visit the shop, they would talk to customers, they would talk to the staff in that shop, and then they would talk to the operational team who were creating the logistical piece. And the impact that had for them was phenomenal, because the sales team started to talk to the operational team who started to talk to the retail team. And in fact, the ideas that came out of that, the retail team subsequently bought into because they were a part of it, and they found a much smoother push through of ideas into each of those operational teams. I loved that. Innovation stations. So I have a friend and another colleague is on this call today who's gone off today to an innovation jam. So she's just joined a new organisation and she's spending the day in an innovation jam. And having come from organisations that don't have rituals, she sent us a photo of herself all ready to go, and she's like ultra excited. Innovation stations are one that we've worked with. So in some organisations, we've actually had a physical hut in the office. And it's a place that's, you know, kind of very creative looking, and you go in for your ideas sessions. And when we worked at Virgin Mobile Australia, the three of us, we had this kind of thing. Everything we did was, you know, even when we had our board meetings, we would be in there with lava lamps and blow up chairs. And the marketing team would go into that room to have their innovation sessions. Another one that we've worked with recently on a client, I'm actually going to hand over to Lucy too, because she set that up as part of their working processes.
Okay, yes, so this is the green light meeting. And as Alex said, this was a client we worked with about a year ago. And it's almost the opposite to the innovation stations in that the organisation was very small, very creative, and it was essentially an entrepreneurial think tank, in that there was quite a large amount of money, and young, innovative, creative entrepreneurs were brought in, given amounts of money to go and set up businesses and be as creative as they liked, looking for that unicorn that was going to turn the world around, the next Uber or the next Deliveroo or something like that. And the issue that we had was not about lack of innovation or lack of creativity. It was actually harnessing that innovation and creativity and putting some good corporate structure around it to make sure that the money was being spent thoughtfully, in a planned way, and that return on investment was being monitored and predicted. So the way that we did that was we introduced a green light meeting, which was once a month. The owner of the organisation would sit with the entrepreneurs, and they would present, when they were ready, they would present their ideas to him, but backed up with all of the facts and figures and research that they had done. And this was actually very counterculture to these young, innovative entrepreneurs. However, what it did mean was once they had done it and they had got the green light from the company owner, they were then free to pursue their ideas. Up until that point, they had always had this feeling that it was being questioned and that they weren't really free to be as innovative as they wanted. And so it started off being quite fearful of it, but we made it quite fun. And it actually did make quite a big cultural transformation for these guys, in that it enabled them to have the freedom to go and implement their ideas.
Yeah. And just on that, I know some of you who we work with already will have heard us talk about the dance floor, the boundaries that you set people in, and then once they're within that dance floor and they've got the clarity of what they need to achieve, get them to dance how they like, so they feel empowered. And that was the kind of psychological underpinnings behind that meeting, and it had great results. Marianne, I think there might be a question.
Yes, thank you for reading your messages. Yes, so Liz has asked a question, and she says, I wonder how you could do this remotely. And I'm not sure whether she's talking about the end of week ritual or the customer chair, because it was in the middle of the chat of both. So I don't know if you want to answer that, because I know we're going to be talking about hybrid working. So.
Yeah. So we fully acknowledge that the hybrid piece can be more complex. I think the reality is that most of these could be set up in a hybrid way. And the book actually that's on the bottom of this particular slide, they talk about the ways to plan some of these rituals and the planning behind them. So in a company I worked for during lockdown, we wanted to run an innovation session, and we sent out letters to home, and we sent out a candle and a number of other things that kind of went out in this pack. And we asked people to spend some time away from their desk, candle on, in a relaxed environment, to think about their ideas and prep. And then we asked them to put them into a particular template. And then subsequently, we ran the session online. So we had kind of had these planning pieces before. Some people had got together to do their innovation brainstorming with partners. So it takes a bit more planning, but I think the reality is it can be done. The customer chair is exactly the same. You've got ways of creating that virtually, so that somebody puts their hand up, into the customer chair they go. And again, that's ritual is being quite symbolic about that. So on a client's birthday recently, everybody was online wearing red. Maybe the person who's in the customer chair wears red. So, it's about being quite symbolic on that remote level. Okay. So measures and goals. Again, we feel really strongly about this. Not all culture change looks at measures or goals. And again, we feel that this differentiates us. It's about making sure that people are aligned in what they do. And one great ritual that we often use with clients around this is what we call speed dating, or strategy speed dating. So for any of you in the audience who has speed dated, I'm sad to say I haven't. It's a very similar concept. You sit opposite each other, you have a set time, 10, 15 minutes, and you go through your strategy or your plan. So once you've got your strategy and each area starts to create their plan, this is about aligning each element of it. And in one of the most powerful ones I saw, it was with an NHS group, and there was 80 people in the room. And by the time we had finished the whole speed dating process throughout the day, we found out that the IT team had 60 things that they needed to do into their measures as a result of what everybody else needed to achieve. And actually they had the resources to do 8. So the impact was about saying, actually, I understand that this is what you need to achieve. Equally, you need me to achieve that for you or with you. And therefore, it's really important that we align. So this is a fabulous ritual. And we've seen it done quarterly, so that every quarter you update on your plan and you see where people are. So if IT say, look, the last rollout of this particular platform took longer, so I'm not going to get to your piece, that impacts your functional plan. So that constant speed dating, we've seen as a great ritual, brings people together. We always hear when we go in our culture audits, people say, I just don't understand what IT do or what broking does or what infection control does. And this is about helping people understand. So it's a really, really powerful ritual that we have seen used a lot. And it's also really fun. So values, they should be kind of fundamental within rituals, but actually, again, we feel really strongly here that values are not something that you can put on a poster, put it up in the office and then leave. Values are something that need to be constantly cultivated, reinforced, and consequences provided for people who don't live that out. So a few rituals on values. One client that we work with does a spotlight on their values for all new starters. And in fact, anybody who has started within the last couple of years. And that workshop includes skills. So if, for example, your value is customer first, there are some skills and some language around the way we talk to customers. And that language then becomes part of that ritual, part of that symbolic nature of the organization. In the guidance that we've got to send to you, one of the examples that Marianne found was Huel. So forgive my language. If anybody's offended, you might just want to go on to mute or similar for a moment. But Huel are about constructive conversations and bringing people together to have conflict, but in a constructive way. And the language that they use, and it's on the wall and it's on everything they do, is don't be a dick. And therefore, it allows people to kind of call each other out. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's the best way, but within those first kind of few months, it is about creating the skills around those values. So if one of your values is straight talking or transparency or being honest, help people with the skills around, for example, radical candor conversations, to have those conversations early on. Another one was community conversations. I loved this. This was about bringing people together to talk about maybe something that's been really difficult. So if something difficult's happened within the organization, bring people together, create the ground rules around the way we talk to each other within that session, but allow people to talk about it so that it's not kind of building up tension within the organization. My first failure book, if one of your values is around fail fast, agile working, learning from mistakes, this organization gave out a My First Failure book and people had to fill it in. And subsequently, they shared it with new starters or with other people in the organization. Small moments jar, a small recognition, very small pieces that people had done either around values or around ways of working, wrote it on a piece of paper, stuck it in a jar. At the end of that week or month, it got called out. The small moments are the piece that is hardest to sustain, but often have the highest power in terms of rituals. Lucy talks about the legends, something that happened within an organization she worked with where people were called out for being customer service heroes or for reinforcing the values. And just on that kind of Friday night session that you'd all have together, the legends would be called out. It's about reinforcing that behavior again. And then one that we often practice in leadership development, but I also experienced as an executive at Mila, is walk and talk. So if we started every exec session with a walk and talk, and you would pair up with another exec, and it would either be around creativity or around removing conflict. So when you walk together and you're not eyeballing, it's sometimes more comfortable to share some conflict or something that you feel uncomfortable about, you need to talk to that individual about. It got my steps up. We were out in the fresh air, and again, it became a fabulous ritual for us. Just before I move on, I see there's lots of things in the chat, but can't see it. Marion, should I?
Yeah, there's a question from Jim, actually. So he's saying values. Totally what you said, yes, they can't be forced. And he's asking, do you have any advice on rituals to help teams in forming phase to identify what their values are? Jim, I don't know if you want to jump on and actually explain a little bit more, whether I read that out properly.
Read out perfectly, thank you, Marion.
Thank you, Jim. Sorry, go.
Hi guys, good to see you again. Yeah, I'm in a team which is in forming phase. There's only a few of us. We haven't actually identified yet what the core values are of the team. So one of the things I'm talking with HR about is how can we maybe workshop what those values, how to identify what those values are, so involve everybody in the process. And then maybe have a suitable ritual to help solidify once we've identified. Yeah,
brilliant. So we do actually have some clients on the call who we've done that with in the last few months. And so we ran a workshop with that team, used that chronology of, you know, what is the organisation about, used that storytelling about what do we really, really want to keep. And then we went through a process across half a day around being really clear on what we needed, what the shift was. So we'd done an audit to be clear from the organisation on what we wanted to achieve in that growth phase, and equally what the culture was now. And we looked at how we got from A to B and what behaviours were required within that shift. We took the words from that shift, that cultural shift piece, and then we started to kind of work it down. In fact, I think we've got 2 clients on who have done that recently. So in terms of time, I might not go through the whole process. I'm really happy to do that one-on-one. And then subsequently, we went out to the organisation with this kind of filtered view of what that was, consulted with them about how that felt, whether that felt right, whether that felt like it was the right thing that we needed to do. We tweaked it from there, a kind of voting system in the end, and then we agreed them. And they are actually running rituals. And in fact, I'm going to talk about one in a moment around the way that they are communicating out about those values. In fact, that's next. So I think there were some values rituals earlier, and I'm going to talk about one of the ways that you can then hold on to those values as we go through. Jim, I know that's not a huge explanation. I'm really happy to sort of talk you through that offline as well.
Just before you move on to the next section, we've got a question from David as well. He's asking, how do you sustain values when under pressure from clients to conform to their, and in brackets, conflicting ones?
Very, very interesting question. I think it's interesting. So one of the clients that we're working with at the moment have very similar values to their clients, actually. So I think in something like conflicting values, I might use something like a community conversation. One of the examples I had was when you have an acquisition to do a welcome party. It was like a wedding. So you bring the 2 parties together to kind of bring them together in a ceremony, a kind of ritual ceremony around how you can connect those values. And I wonder whether you could use half of a community conversation and half of a kind of ceremony of bringing people together to actually talk about those values, be honest about them, get the right people in the room and connect them through, let's be honest about the fact that some of these values conflict. How do we bring those together? How do we meet in the middle around this? And actually, what is the messaging out to our organisation? Because if I think about what you do, David, the messaging to possibly up to hundreds of people who are talking to that customer have got to understand that nuanced messaging around those 2 values. So again, I'd love to talk about that in more detail, but they would be 2 rituals I think you could bring together to create that. Let's be really transparent about this. Some of these conflict. How do we bring them together in that kind of speed dating piece?
Alex, I don't know if you can see the chat, but David's saying he loves the wedding idea, outlaws to in-laws.
Yeah, exactly that. I loved that idea. And I loved it in an acquisition. We quite often work with acquisitions and we go out and we interview kind of both teams. And actually the idea of this sort of ritual ceremony of bringing the 2 together to some extent saying goodbye to a bit of the past and being honest about the way that the future is going to look. I loved that. And I would want to be a celebrant. Okay. Communication. So the channels in which two-way communication happens and their effectiveness. So again, some of my lovely colleagues on the call, one of the having created those values that Jim asked about and being really clear on what they were, we created a playbook. We went out to talk about those values. We used storytelling in the way that we communicated them. But some of the frustration from that senior team was actually we just communicate out and we don't get anything back. It's like it goes into a black hole. And subsequently, as a leader, you think no one's listening. So we changed that up. And we have only run a couple, but we've run global live sessions. That's not the name of them, but I'm conscious I don't want to use the client name. And where they're updating on the strategy that they've just created and on those values. And in that first session, we put people into breakout rooms and some of the senior leaders facilitated that. And we gave them 2 or 3 open questions and it was a game changer. In fact, we had to break them up. Somebody else who's on the call and I had to kind of go and stop people who were in full flow. They've run it again since, and again, the feedback has been brilliant. So one of the pieces of feedback they gave us from the first session was there's one value we don't really understand, we don't really get it. So subsequently we put together another communication, and in that second session we ran it about that particular value. So in terms of your question, Jim, really about them getting really under the skin of those values. We've given lots of examples about how that's worked in action in the organisation, and we've asked for recognition. And I remember saying to this client, you're not going to get lots of recognition. Nobody's going to answer it at first. That's okay. We're going to keep going. And in fact, we've had lots of responses. And the culture and the morale feels good and feels positive around it. Subsequently, they're following up via other communications, so via newsletters, via playbooks, detailing more information. And you're working with clients like this who put this energy in, this sustained energy to keep it going is an absolute privilege. And I think some of the results we've seen of changing that communication style and creating this ritual, which we've got a long way to go with, but has been massively positive. Please feel free, said client, to post on chat, but I'm very grateful to be able to share that here, so thank you. Okay, I'm conscious of our time, so moving on into this piece around the employee experience. So rather than using our culture wheel, I'm going to use the touch points of the employee experiences. So at each different level, I admit that you're going to have people who are going to experience this differently, because your attraction candidates are going to experience it differently to when they work for the organisation. But if the rituals are connected, they are joined up interventions, you're starting to create your culture right back from attracting your people. And in terms of, once you've got those values clear and you know what they are, they should be in your attraction strategy, in your recruitment strategy. So in Virgin, our recruitment was all assessment centres. It was very attitude-based. So we were able to put in some kind of quite fun role play type scenarios. Again, everybody sat on bubble chairs. There was lava lamps everywhere. We asked people about their understanding of the Virgin brand, and we did that in a really fun way. So even if people didn't get in, our glass door looked good, people were attracted to the brand. And subsequently, we were able to follow that through in each of those employee touch points. So in induction, we saw a great one recently, the Mars welcome box. So we're sourcing this back to LinkedIn, where they're sending out from a hybrid perspective to make sure that all new starters experience that in the same way. So they receive this fabulous box. Excuse me. Another thing was a treasure hunt. So they were able to, they had to go out and look for clues about their team or clues about people who they work with or people who their stakeholders are, or parts of teams where they needed to find files. And it was set up as a treasure hunt. They could do it remotely or they could do it in the office. Another one was a crash the desk. So where everybody who wanted to meet that new starter would crash their desk at lunchtime, bring lunch for the new starter. Equally, they could do that remotely, so that they would be invited to their first lunch on their first day and everybody would crash the desk. Some really kind of innovative, I think, ways of doing that. Couple of others on that system would be under environment and structure. And at Mila, we would often, we had the washing machines, which not all of our employees could afford to buy, even with our significant discounts. So we put them in the call centres and we got everybody to bring in their duvets or their cashmeres. And, you know, we would have like a kind of communal wash. Starbucks also do their coffee. They have regular kind of coffee sessions with their people so that you're learning about your brand and learning about your structure. And just one final piece on that in performance. So again, with lots of clients recently, we've set up agile performance systems, quarterly sessions with their people, using values, using rituals. And actually, whilst it's not always seen as the most exciting ritual, it's something that if people feel that they're being held accountable for their performance quarterly, that becomes a ritual. And by using the values in that, back to Jim's question, that's a way of sustaining it, is holding people accountable for their behaviour around the way that they push those values through the organisation. Okay, I am conscious of our time, so forgive me. It's fabulous to have so much interaction on the chat. So in terms of that, creating a practical guide, do start by looking at what already exists. So rather than forcing people into rituals, find what exciting stuff already happens and look to kind of make that more fun, make that more interesting. Be clear on what you're trying to achieve. So if you go back to that communications ritual, we had an issue that we couldn't get two-way dialogue. So we were clear on what we needed to achieve and we created a purposeful intervention around that. Be aware that rituals can have a negative impact. Lucy talks about an organisation she worked with where there was a 9:15 sales call every morning. And if you didn't get the sales from the day before, there was some shouting. Clearly, that is kind of micromanagement, toxic feeling for people. So whilst it might feel like a ritual, actually be aware that the behaviours that you're pushing out as a leader to impact that. Make sure that they are inclusive. Marianne and I, in Australia, we used to have corridor cricket on a Thursday afternoon, fabulously inclusive ritual, but we all then went out and frankly quite often got quite drunk. And if I think about some of the D&I surveys we've been involved in lately, quite often what comes back is people saying a lot of our rituals are based around alcohol. And that doesn't make me feel very comfortable. So just really worth thinking through who your audience is and constantly making sure that, for example, your team in Brazil aren't always being asked to that town hall at 11 p.m. And then don't overwhelm people. So ideally don't leave here and set up 19 rituals. And I guess the other thing to say is about the repetition. It's about sustaining them and keeping them going. It's fun to set them up. The energy is in keeping that process going. So to conclude, and I have talked a lot, they set up a clear path for people to follow. They create a sense of belonging, provide a safe space for people to experiment. They can embed all areas of your culture wheel, so they are a holistic way of embedding culture. They can set you apart, but please remember that the repetition is absolutely key. Thank you.
Brilliant, Alex. Thank you so much. You can take a breath now. I'm very conscious of time, but has anybody got any final questions for Alex before we conclude? Okay, all right. Well, thank you all very much for joining us today. Hopefully you found that interesting. It's been great to see the level of interaction on the chat as well. Marianne's posted a number of threads, a number of links in the chat to various research sources that we used in putting together today. She's also posted a link to our monthly newsletter. If you'd like to sign up, the link's in the chat. Also, the Marianne, have you done it yet? Oh yes, Marianne's also posted a link to a handout on rituals as well. So please do feel free to download that extra information, which gives additional insight into what we've covered today. I will also, by the end of today as well, email you all that link as well, just for completeness. I think as well, there was particularly the conversation with Jim on values. We're very happy to take one-on-one meetings with any of you to talk about either rituals or any other element of the culture wheel, and to focus on your business in particular. So rather than take generic information, actually have a conversation with you about what it could mean for your business. So please do get in touch. We're very happy to do that for you. Follow us on LinkedIn, and that's the other thing. We've got a very active LinkedIn page, so please, you can connect with either any of the three of us, but also we have a LinkedIn page for our company, which we keep up to date all the time. So other than that, thank you all once again for joining. Oh, let's see, one question there. After going through a restructure that has not gone well and impacting staff wellbeing, I'll ensure to use some of these. Brilliant, Liz. Of course, you know where I am, Liz, if you need any more information on that.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I'm just going to read the chat now, so I feel like I hadn't had the chance.
I'm going to stop recording, Maz.